Greetings, everyone. I'm Hitendra Wadhwa, the founder of Mentora Institute, and it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to Intersections, where our aspiration is to dissolve boundaries between science and spirituality, between the inner and the outer, between East and West and beyond, for the purpose of having us explore our full potential as human beings, as humanity, and as life at large. Today, we will have the opportunity to do that dissolving of boundaries in a very, very special way by creating a connection between two of real passions for me. One of them is to learn from different, very storied faith-based disciplines. And we have the honor and privilege today to have one of the preeminent exponents of Sufism, one of these disciplines that I have long had a deep fascination and respect and reverence for. And the other thing we will do is combine that exposure and education and inspiration gaining from Sufism with one topic that in some ways is at the very core of advancing human consciousness, which is, what does it take for us to consciously sculpt our personality? To share insights and learnings on these topics with us, I have in our midst today Shaikh-al-Mashaik Mahmood Khan, who is a senior Sufi representative of the Inayat Khan Sufism movement. And let me just tell you a little bit about Shaikh-al-Mashaik to get us started. He is a descendant of an ancient family of Sufi saints and thinkers and musicians. He is somebody who's learned Sufism so closely from within just the practice in his own family and then ultimately in his own life. And therefore, he's learned it from within, both the theory and the understanding of what it is, but also the lived practice of how to experience and express it. He's devoted his life to the preservation and enhancement of a particular movement in Sufism, the Indian Sufism movement, and its very mystical and musical traditions. He's been granted the rank of a Knight Officer in the Order of Orange Nassau for his services to Sufism by the King of Netherlands. And he's had, can you believe that, over 9 decades of involvement in Inayatian Indian Sufism. And therefore, he is in a really exceptional position within the Sufi world to come today and share his insights and thoughts with us. I am so grateful to have you in our midst. Welcome so much, Shaikh-al-Mashaik.
Thank you so very much. It's a very great happiness to be able to be in contact with you. I've heard about everything you do in spreading this idea of combining life in a successful way as well. So that's a wonderful aim and the most inspiring perspective to hold, one which we in Indian Sufism, of course, have been accustomed to, but it's so wonderful to see that how you carry on this great tradition of Indian spiritual search alongside our outer accomplishment.
Yeah, the one thing I really, found so heartwarming about our interaction right from the get-go is that you turn this around so graciously into what I'm doing, whereas I'm here to really celebrate and value, all these decades of beautiful contributions that you have made. And I just see that as an instinct in you, just to look for goodness and to celebrate the goodness in anyone that you're maybe interacting with. So thank you for just kind of living out your own teaching just through that very gracious expression. We have a little bit of a connectivity. Yeah, we seem to have a little bit of a connectivity issue, sir, with your maybe with the internet from your side, but we folks, to all of us who are tuned in today, let's kind of brave through it. Let's get through it. I think we may have a little bit of patchwork here and there to have to be mindful of, but for the most part, there is so much to be inspired by and learn from in this moment that we'll just keep going. And in the worst case, if something is not consistently turning out to be good, we'll see if we can maybe turn off the video, Shaikh-al-Mashaik, and see if that will make the audio, quality better. So we'll work on that. But for now, let's, try to keep striving. So I noticed also, by the way, that we have a really international audience here with us today. I'm noticing Natasha from Gurgaon, India, Shamsher from Germany, Alonso from Colombia, Kathy from Netherlands, And then one of you, I don't know your name, ID 360, as you're showing up here from Texas. Rolla from Texas as well. I mean, Sharif from San Francisco. Kamal from Nepal, him from Philadelphia. So anyway, so we have a very, very global audience. Warm welcome to all of you. Please keep using chat as a way to communicate and connect with each other. But Shaikh-al-Mashaik, can we just maybe start by having you lay out for us what is Sufism?
Yes, well, Sufism started, let us say, as a kind of blanket term. Well, let me start with what Inayat Khan, the great modern Sufi today, used to say. He said, Sufism was intellectually born in Arabia, devotionally reared in Persia, and spiritually completed in India. Now, what does he mean by the born intellectually in Persia? There he thinks not, of the Bedouin and all the sandy wastes of Arabia, but of the great Baghdad civilization, which was one of the, for many centuries, Baghdad, until, of course, the destruction by the Mongols, was a cultural center which integrated all the traditions of the Middle East, of the Mediterranean. So even the older Egyptian tradition is represented in it. Then all these different spiritual currents, Gnosticism, and all the different religions of the Middle East, including Zoroastrianism. Then, of course, very important, the Greek tradition. As you know, in the same way that the Greek philosophical tradition was the root of European philosophy, the same thing applied to Persia, to Arabia. So, and the Greek Neoplatonism became an important element in Arabic Greek philosophy, and ultimately became the philosophical background of these different schools and esoteric schools and training facilities and philosophies which flourished in the Baghdad period. And so, as I say, then Sufism in a sense was a blanket term. In the course of time it became more specific, but it still always was the heir of that enormously rich, let us say, Western tradition of the Mediterranean, of the Middle East. In that sense, it arrived in Persia. And there, of course, you get an enormous flourishing of mystical poetry of the Persians. There, of course, that's why Inayat Khan says, was devotionally reared in Persia. Why devotionally? Because beauty. There in Persia, it was the beauty of verse, the beauty of poetry, which expressed these mystical sentiments as a mystical experience. And so in that shape of beauty, when you are touched by something of beauty, then already you forget your outer self. You forget your external self because you are focused on whatever thing strikes you as beautiful. It may be nature, maybe one of the arts, it may be even one of the sciences, something which totally absorbs you, raises you already out of your own empirical outer selfhood. So that was a very important step in Persia. Then Sufism came to India. And there, of course, as Inayat Khan keeps reminding us, their Sufism was enormously enriched by the fact that India had an ages-long tradition of meditation, of spiritual contemplation, of contemplative philosophy, of everything to do with the spiritual life that had been there from the oldest time, the Vedic time onwards. So there you get suddenly a Sufism which is enormously enriched by that tradition which was already present in India. And what, in a sense, you might say, Sufism added to that was, of course, that very much the great traditions of India, the greatest ones anyway, the different schools of Hindu philosophy, yoga, and of course that the Buddhism, which after all is an outgrowth of Indian traditions, that they tended to idealize something which, of course, for spiritual life is wonderful. That means the world renunciation. But Sufism, as from its Western tradition, was kind of world embracing. And so, in a sense, the work of Inayat Khan was also of making, emphasizing that Indian spirituality in the shape of Sufism could also be world embracing. So that cultural element became very important as well. And, there was that great integration of cultures in India anyway. And let me remind you that in the world generally, we have had great cultures generally, great civilizations, great societies, mostly focused, built around some kind of religious ideology, but there have always been minorities in every, whether or not they were tolerated. You know, Europe has a terribly bad record of tolerating minorities. We know all that. In most other societies, there was a certain tolerance for minorities. But the unique thing of India, and I cannot emphasize that enough, has been that in India there was not a question of a dominant society and minorities. In India, you had two full-grown civilizations. The Indian one, in the sense of the Hindu tradition, with everything that entailed. As I said, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, everything that included that Indian tradition, religious, philosophical, and mystical at the same time. All these three levels were there in enormous riches. And that was the Indian civilization as such. Then you get the other civilization, in principle the Islamic civilization, which was, of course, very much again developed throughout the Baghdad tradition, then through Persia. So in India, you had the extraordinary, in my view, unique element that two of the greatest world civilizations lived together for centuries and lived together in harmony. Of course, you had all kind of rulers who fought with one another for territory and for whatever. But in that, the confessional element was never really there. For instance, the famous Maratha revolt, which is only later presented as a kind of national Indian revolt by later historians that projected backward. They also just as well fought with Muslim armies and Muslim officers. So there was not a confessional difference between these different princes who fought, well, they always fight, that's what the princes for. But there was that unity between two great civilizations in one, admittedly large subcontinent, but it's still, and according to me, in the whole tradition of the world, that's unique. Not one major and minorities, but two full-grown civilizations living, and that only broke down when that foreign element of nationalism came in. And then you get nationalism and you get that idea of one man, one vote democracy, that all these notions we did not belong either to one or the other. And that created total different actual disasters. Because then again, in the subcontinent broke up in so many different parts as it is today.
Sure.
And we don't yet see, we do not yet see what we have seen in Europe, where the great countries, France and Germany, had been enemies for centuries. And then after the Seventh World, they said, oh, stop this nonsense. Now we have to become one. And they did. We're still waiting for that to happen in the subcontinent. Right.
So this was a very powerful sweep through the history and journey of Sufism. I find that from what you've said that clearly it comes across as a very assimilative kind of tradition, something that is very nuanced based on the multiple influences that it's had. And the culmination of that journey from Baghdad to Persia to India that you've shared, when you come to India and then the Islam, spark, the initial spark in Sufism meets with the Hindu civilization of India, are you suggesting that it was that interface between the two that kind of led to that final step in the evolution of what is called Indian Sufism?
Exactly. And that is what the modern Hazrat Inayat Khan always insists upon. And he said, well, of course, there were these two great civilizations, the Hindu civilization, the Muslim civilization, if you want to define religiously. But both of them had, so to speak, an upper story of mysticism. And in mysticism, you will always experience the same. So ultimate human fulfillment, ultimate human spiritual life, there, if you experience it through the method of Sufism, or through the method of one of the Hindu schools, or through the method of Buddhism, the achievement will be the same. The experience of inner reality will be the same.
Right. Please, yeah.
People were formulated according to their philosophical or religious concepts, but that's a formulation of something which goes down to a lower level. But as an experience, it is the same. It's
Right. I like very much what you're saying, which is, the way we have, in a very naive and simple way, kind of try to partition the world into these religious kind of, identities. What you're saying is that, actually speaking, across all of these, great faiths, there is a undercurrent of mysticism. And when a mystic from one faith meets a mystic from another faith, they are like brothers and sisters. It doesn't matter what the outer form of the faith is.
Absolutely. That's perfectly true. Yes. And that
Yes.
awareness has been there in India very strongly.
Yeah, so beautiful. Let's do this. Let's translate this from the broader outer commentary to the more personal commentary for about another, 10 minutes. And then we want to go into the art of personality.
Yeah.
So could you share with us a little bit the contribution that, has been made in your family, right? In this whole journey, I mean, from Hazrat Inayat Khan to beyond. Could you share a little bit about that, maybe culminating in your own? Could we spend about 5 minutes on that?
Well, it's hard to do that in a short period. But anyway, of course, the family, in the first place, they came in from Central Asia at the time that a very unpleasant fellow was ruling there, Timur Lenk. So that was not a person they felt comfortable with. So they migrated to India and eventually settled on land in northern India again, in Punjab. And so they had taken with them that idea of mysticism. But then, of course, that developed a great development in India. Another thing they had, there was that kind of shamanistic tradition of incantation. Now, their incantation developed into Indian classical music, and their sense of magic of mysticism developed into typical Sufism and became a typical Indian Sufism. So there, of course, that assimilation to that existing culture, which they found in India, has been very strong and very fertile, and that continued for many generations. The tradition was that in every generation of the family, at least there should be one full mystic, and so that was their general. And then, of course, that mysticism became combined with music, because it's all very well to live off land and have the time to cultivate mysticism and all kinds of things, but or land ownership, unless you have it on a very large scale, is precarious. There may be the harvest, maybe you will lose your harvest, you may lose your farmers, all kinds of things may happen which diminish your position as a landowning family. So it was precarious. You had to do something with your culture. The culture, you spent your time on culture, but you have to do something that culture can be made useful also in case of need. So in their case, that was music. So where their ideal occupation of their leisure was in fact mysticism, at the same time music was something which was cultivated and very, very akin to mysticism, because it brought in a lot of aesthetic contemplation, but at the same time something could be practically used if your land did not produce to meet your needs. Then of course there was always, you had recourse to the many courts in India to close. You didn't publish, you didn't play music in public. You always had closed circles of music lovers, or closed these Maharaja courts and so on, where you could perform in private. So that was there. And so with Inayat Khan, you get suddenly this whole idea that music and mysticism, which have an old tradition of togetherness in the Indian, especially in Indian civilization, that was the kind of thing he wanted to bring to the fore again. Because for him, music was the highest form of aesthetic contemplation, and that aesthetic contemplation, since beauty already kind of raises you out of your I-ness. If your selfhood is already, so to speak, dissolved in the beauty of nature and the beauty of art, but to the highest degree in music, because it is the most abstract of the arts. So for him, the musical contemplation was something which already leads up to the meditative life. And that was actually what he but when he came to the West with his two brothers, he didn't at all come and spread Sufism, as later his followers have pretended, but it's absolutely untrue. They went just to make a ground tour of the West and to come to know the Western world. And of course, then he gave lectures, and he wanted to say, all right, the Europeans have brought a lot of benefits to India in many ways, but they should also recognize that India has many things of matchless greatness, which Europe has never known. So
if you don't mind pausing there for a second, Shaikh-al-Mashaik, I just want to make sure we are all tracking you. So you're now talking about this preeminent, teacher of Indian Sufism, right? Hazrat Inayat Khan. And I'm going to ask my colleague to put up his picture there for us as well. And so this is him, right? And he is a pioneer in then bringing this Indian Sufism to the West.
That's right. But it was completely spontaneous. Because as I said, he and his two brothers went to the West in 1910 to come to know the West, but at the same time to inform the West that they had a lot of things to bring to India, but India had some things which in themselves were matchless. And to them, the highest kind of cultural expression of Indian life was precisely the music. So what happened? Inayat Khan gave a number of lectures on music, but always relating that to Indian spiritual life. And once, or actually twice, he was invited to speak in the Hindu temple in San Francisco, I think it was. I always get mixed up, excuse me for that, with San Francisco and Los Angeles. One of those places was the Hindu.
Sure.
And so there he gave a lecture on music. But whenever he spoke of music, he related to the Indian traditions. Look at the Hindu gods. They invented the Veena, Shiva invented the Veena, Saraswati invented the southern Veena, then Krishna had the flute. And so music has been divine in India from the earliest times. And then he mentioned these great old saints of music, Narada, and so on and so forth. So he said he spoke about music and Indian mysticism, that, so to speak, related to that music. You know what the reaction of people was? Then he played his music after all his explanations. Then people said, well, this music of India, it's interesting, we like it. It's curious, but don't really understand it. But what you said about the mystical, of the spiritual linkage of music, that interests us very much. Can't you tell us more about that? And that way he started quite spontaneously, quite without any intention of wanting to bring Sufism to the West. He started shifting his explanations of music, more and more explanations of mysticism. And what he did was that typical Indian mysticism, which is completely, as I say, completely merged in that Indian tradition. So you find Advaita, Vaishishta Advaita, and all the different concepts which in the Hindu tradition, you find in both as such and in their parallels in traditional Sufism. So
very nice. We want to spend in a few minutes. We want to get to apply that to the art of personality. I think we have just about 5 minutes more, Shaikh-al-Mashaik, to talk about family before we get to that. So I'm going to ask my colleague to put up a couple of more pictures for us here. But would you mind sharing a little bit about, some of the other luminaries in your family lineage, beyond this wonderful, pioneer who went forth to the West with his two brothers, for which we were just talking about. For example, maybe you can talk for a minute about actually what brings you and me together is the initial introduction I got to your family through my daughter coming to me and talking about Noor Inayat Khan and talking about what an incredible hero she has been to her, to my daughter. That got me to study your cousin, Noor Inayat Khan. Maybe you can talk about her, and then we'll close with a little bit of life reflection about you for the next 5 minutes, and then come back to the art of personality.
Yes, as you wish. Yes, of course.
Okay, wonderful.
Well, of course, I should also mention one person more. You said if you want to talk about a family, that was in the best of Indian matrilineal traditions, that was the maternal grandfather. He was really the greatest patriarch of the family. He drove that family from the Punjab into Baroda, and he was a great musician as well. He sought to connect the Hindustani and the Carnatic forms of music. And of course, he went to the Carnatic. He was very successful in Mysore and these places. And so he adopted very many habits and traditions of the South. And so for him, that matrilineal tradition became very important. And Inayat Khan, being his maternal grandson, very much was influenced by him also. Now, that was that personality. I think there might be a picture of him also among the photographs, Malabars. Now, in addition, you asked about Noor. Well, she was, of course, Inayat Khan's daughter, the elder of his two daughters, and here she is, yes. And she was an extraordinarily gifted person of her own, and very versatile, but there was something in her which at the same time, if you look at that tragic fate of hers in the war, there was something in her early life kind of prefigures that, in the sense when Inayat Khan suddenly died, she was 12, 13 years old. And then, of course, her mother had completely collapsed. She was no longer able to function, really. And she, as a 13-year-old girl, had to kind of sacrifice her young life for the sake of her siblings, with all of them younger, and she had to kind of take over care of them. So there you also find that element of self-sacrifice. Then another thing is that, you know, in that kind of discussing religions, which of course the Sufi used to do, Sufi followers used to discuss it, then Christianity, among all the religions, was called the religion of divine self-sacrifice. So France, of course, was a Christian country to the extent of religious at all. It had a kind of Catholic tradition. So Christianity, divine self-sacrifice. Then she herself involved in sacrificing her young girl's life for the sake of her siblings. Then there, of course, in Sufism, you have that idea of nafs, the selfhood which has to be transcended. Now, in Inayat Khan's further development of that view, of that teaching, of course, you grow out of your personality, but first you develop your personality, then you go out of it. But in the earlier days, they speak of nafs-koshi, the Persian, would be very rigid, killing the outside ego, kind of the ego must be, so to speak, done away with. So that nafs-koshi, that crushing the ego, crushing selfhood, that again was an... So you see all these elements playing in this young girl's life. And then she published a book of Buddhist Jataka tales. And there you see that we always see that the Bodhisattva in his different appearances in the animal world sacrifices himself for his fellows. And so then all the others are able to live happily because of the sacrifice of that main Bodhisattva who's really their leader and then sacrifices himself for them. So with all those emphases on self-sacrifice, it is understandable that, so to speak, her whole life was prefigured. And in a way, she was a beautiful girl. She had a very dainty personality, highly intelligent, deeply sensitive, a very impressive person. Once you met her, you wouldn't have forgotten her. So in a way, that there's an enormous loss. That
I want to share, Shaikh-al-Mashaik, thank you for sharing that past, because it really helps me understand better what must have been going on within her to make her reach this really remarkable point where, from what I understand from their history, both she and her brother decided that they were not going to participate in the war in a way that would put them in a position where they were going to kill people, because they, were practitioners of non-violence.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they wanted to put themselves in a place where they could make the highest sacrifice, from the standpoint of serving the community. And in her case, she ended up being a radio operator, and the average survival of a radio operator was just a few months before they were actually discovered by the Nazis behind enemy lines and were ultimately typically arrested and killed. And so she put herself in harm's way without taking on a position that would put anybody else in harm's way in order to serve the community. I thought that was just incredible. And that's what happened. She went there to behind the enemy lines in France and became this radio operator for a while. And then she was discovered and betrayed and arrested and killed. Ultimately, it's an incredible story of heroism.
It's really an incredible story. And you see, first she was warned from leader from England. They said, all right, you have been here for very long, you are now too much in danger, your whole network has already been arrested, now you come back, now you have to come back, we send a plane and pick you up. She said, no, I will not go before my replacement, if you have arranged for a replacement. Somebody must replace me, I won't come now. Then she found some kind of solution apparently for this, or then they said, no, you have to come, but life became too dangerous. The second time she agreed, all right, I will come. It was being arranged that a plane would be sent. At that moment she was betrayed. So it's an extraordinary kind of coincidence of her life, and extremely tragic, extremely heroic, and very, very touching for giving the person.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's such an honor to be talking to you, in the context of just knowing, what I have learned about her, and just what like an incredible story she is. Folks, I encourage you, if you don't really know about Noor Inayat Khan, get to know her. I mean, she is out, very actively in the, in the history pages. You can see from the stamp we were showing you, she's been honored by, by Great Britain as well for her contributions. And, more recently, there have been a number of, movies that have been made, on her life. And so there's much that one can really kind of learn about her. And I would encourage you to do that. And to be sitting here with her cousin, right? You, Shaikh-al-Mashaik, is an incredible honor. Now, coincidentally, this is really special, but just just a couple of days ago, one of my colleagues, Mohit, at Mentora Institute, just told me that there was, in this Indian version of, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, there was a question that was asked about her as to what alliance she used during the Second World War. And this is the lady, the contestant, Himani, who actually answered it right. The answer is D, Jean-Marie Renier. And so coincidentally, Noor Inayat Khan was actually on the Indian, airwaves just this week. And by answering this question right, Himani won a 1 crore prize. 1 crore is like Indian, the Indian version of $1 million. I mean, it's less than $1 million, currency wise, but it's like in India, it would take you to where $1 million can take you in the United States. So she won that on the basis of answering this question right. And incidentally, Himani is blind. So it was quite a touching tale.
Yes,
yeah. So, sir, let's do this. If you're okay with it, I want to go into the art of personality, since we promised that to our listeners, that today we're going to dive into that. And so I have a quote here from, Hazrat Inayat Khan's book, where his where Pir Zia Inayat Khan, right? He's saying this. He's saying that individuality is given. That's what Hazrat Inayat Khan says. But personality must be discovered and created. Yes. In a realized personality, the soul expresses its divine inheritance through its thoughts, words, and actions. In personality, is born that spirit which is the rebirth of the soul. I really love these lines. And this is a book that I'm basically reading from. So for our audience, it's a book of compiled lectures and thoughts from Hazrat Inayat Khan on topics like personality and character. So what I really loved about that, Shaikh-al-Mashaik, is that, in the West, until recently, there has been a lot of emphasis on what personality are you? What personality are you? What personality are you? As though each of us is a completely fixed personality. Yes. But here is ancient wisdom telling us that no, there's an art of personality. There's an art of cultivating personality, of choosing and refining, your personality over time.
Yes. And always, why develop that personality? Of course, in the first place, in order to communicate with your fellow man, in order to serve your fellow man, that's a very important tenet, very important aspect of personality, to communicate with the other, to sacrifice for the other, etc. But at the same time, also to have something to outgrow. As a human being, you always need some further goal to reach. And the human being, going through the different stages, in this young age, the emphasis will be on his physical existence, but then it becomes his intellectual existence, maybe then his emotional existence, his existence of feeling life. But beyond the physical, beyond the psychological, there is, so to speak, that third the third story of his house, let us say, which is the life of his soul. But to reach that, you also have to first complete the other types. Complete your ground floor of physical being, complete your first floor of the mind and the heart. Then Inayat Khan says, then, well, you see, the heart is the depth of the mind is the surface of the heart. But both the intellectual element and also the emotional element of the mind are developed in acting through the body. So the mind and the body sort of really create your own personality with its emotions and with its thoughts. Heart has its own autonomy, so to speak. Its faculty of loving, its sense of beauty, a sense of the inner realities of life. And so the heart already looks in two directions. It looks to the mind, it looks to the body, but at the same time it looks to that further third story of the human being, the soul. It opens up to the life of the soul. So the completion of every stage of this life, physical, mental, the heart's life, the soul, is essential for the fulfillment of the next stage. And
yeah. That it's so rich and so profound, sir. And one of the things I'm hearing from you recurrently, which I just want to highlight for myself and for others, is this theme of beauty.
Yes.
And how in Sufism, it almost seems to me like there is this celebration of the art in everything. And what you're saying is that the greatest, in a sense, painting that, each of us is responsible for making is our own self, is the beauty of our own personality.
Yes, that's right, yes. And that is the great, the sense of beauty as such already raises one beyond the narrowness of one's external self, because you contemplate each to which you can reach out. And by the very joy of reaching out to that which you experience as beautiful, already one's personality is, so to speak, expanded and deepened and getting a further element of enrichment. And
yes.
Please.
Okay, so to that end, what have you found in your teachings and your community's teachings to be the building blocks, so to say, or how do you unpack and dissect this idea of personality, which can be otherwise so profound and so at times imposing, for someone to think about?
Yes, well, of course, with him it is always with Inayat Khan, start with very simple things in order to come to the very profound ones. That's another thing. He very often in his teaching, he is almost playfully light in what he says in order to reach something very profound. So out of personality, he begins, the first thing, look at creating a kind of sense of humanity in yourself. That's the basic thing. Create a sense of humanity and develop the humane qualities of the personality. How do you develop that? Whatever you do in life, however you are active in life, try to develop a love of beauty in whatever sense. Try to love, as I said, the beauty of nature, or the beauty of any form of art, or indeed the beauty of contemplating certain aspects of science, and whatever it be, but contemplate something which you can experience for you, for your taste, as something beautiful. Because that will already kind of stabilize and develop your sense of being and expand your sense of whom you are, of the personality you aim at becoming. So love of beauty is a very first thing, and everybody has some kind of taste. You have, as a human being, you have a kind of taste, a kind of intuition, which something you grasp intuitively as something which you can relate to as you find really beautiful. At whatever stage of development a person is, something will be there which appeals to him. So cultivate that sense not only of your concerns and your material interests, but alongside them, not that there's anything wrong with them, but supplement them by something which is beauty, which develops that sense of beauty in you. And so, as I said, there is that mind and heart, that relationship of the mind and heart, the second story, so to speak, of the house of the Sufi, and they have to interact with one another. And then in that same context, he says, because he always, wants to bring you something light when he speaks something very profound. He wants to bring you something of a certain lightness of touch as well. That's typical for him as well. So he said, you see, every soul has a sense of beauty. Every soul has to be an Apsara in Indra's court. And don't think that you can be a bystander, that your soul can be a bystander there. No, you have to dance as well. You have to dance too, as an Apsara in the court of India, to have that sense of beauty of divine reality. So the first thing is that sense of beauty. Then the second thing, which he finds extremely important, develop a sense of gratitude, of appreciation. In other words, that's again something which transcends your ego awareness, because by gratitude, by appreciation, you create an accommodation in yourself regarding somebody else. There are all these people who always want to be critical of somebody else. No, begin by appreciation, begin by gratitude. So look at beauty, look at, develop gratitude, appreciation for everything you can find in life to regard as a cause for that gratitude, from your fellow man, from circumstances, from conditions, whatever. Then there is, of course, to check impulses, to control one's impulses. And that's what he calls turning a man into a gentleman. Now, I don't know how you would put that in the female, but anyway, in those days, that was not much a problem because it included, man included everybody. So turn man into a gentleman, because gentleness, he says, gentleness is the principal thing in the art of personality. Because that gentleness teaches you consideration for another person. And so that's what he recommends. And that section, he concludes by the words, how rightly the distinction has been made in the English language between man and gentleman. So that is what he says about that checking of impulses, controlling oneself, that one should never hurt anybody by any word or any expression or any behavior. Don't hurt any of your fellow men, not even those closest to you, and certainly those who are further away. Don't hurt another person. Then, of course, there are different other of these elements. One is, don't try persuasiveness. Don't try to impose your opinion, to persuade another person of your opinion. No, don't do that. It's much better to, if there is an issue of that kind, rather take back your own aspiration. Rather, do not impose your ideas on the other, but avoid persuasiveness of any kind whatsoever, even at the sacrifice of your own desires.
So, Shaikh-al-Mashaik, let me jump in on that one. Yeah. The ones that you have shared so far, I was relating to, and quite a lot. This last one that you shared, I'm intrigued to unpack it a little bit more, because there might be some nuance there that I'm missing, at present. For instance, if you are an agent of justice, yes, if there is some injustice going on, yes, if there are some, weaker, people, and you have a position of strength because you are, perhaps, the parent, or if you are, person societally in a position, where you have certain resources available to you, then would it not be the right thing to do to, in fact, seek to use, whatever, resources you have, your power of persuasion, your, your personality, whatever, to seek to, right a wrong, and to seek to move people in the right direction rather than be quiet?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that you would find in many other pages in Inayat Khan as well. But, he always says he makes one point in a particular context. He may make exactly the opposite point in another context.
Okay.
So he is not that because he says this applies in all circumstances, all conditions. This is just the sense of personal discipline,
yes,
with one's relationships, where indeed one has, of course, to stand for
That makes a lot of sense. I really loved what you just said, because in a sense, I mean, I'm I'm a little drop. He's the ocean, but just in that little drop-like way, I want to say that in my own work in recent years, I've definitely emerged with this conclusion that while we may seek to be very grounded and centered from within, from the outside, we often have to be everything and the complete opposite. It just depends on the situation. Exactly. And to have that wisdom to know and that freedom to be able to choose is what makes us.
Absolutely, yes, exactly. No, that is perfectly right. But as I say, he is very much concerned here with this particular kind of breeding of the person as person in order to function outside. But really, how do you... But you're absolutely right in making the remark you made. I'm glad you made it, because as I said, that would certainly be a thing you find in many different contexts. It would take a whole lecture to discuss these matters, of course. But anyway, it's interesting and valuable. Now, another thing, what he brings up then is, there is in the human being what the Sufis call kibriya. And kibriya really means vanity or pride or conceit. And then he said, well, you see, that kind of kibriya, that kind of vanity, of course, it's something which you would like to overcome. But it's at the same time something you will never overcome, because that's simply part of the human ego. The human being has that sense of vanity in it. So it is not a thing you can root out or you can change, but you can develop it. You can develop it to something that, you say, make it reincarnate as a plant of desires. So yeah, the ego, it may be the ego, but that ego is also related to the soul. It's related to the divine spark as in the human being. So you have to accommodate, to allow that kind of vanity to develop into something which is beyond pure ego satisfaction, let us say. So that's quite a subtle question, but it is something which he finds very important.
I get reminded there of a moment in the life of Benjamin Franklin, who, perhaps you know, is
yes.
a great, accomplished individual, one of the founding fathers here in the United States, explorer, discoverer, scientist, everything. So he once talked about how a friend told him that, people respect you, but they don't necessarily like you because you come across as very strong, in that persuasion sense.
Yes,
and he said, I decided that I'll work on that. I'll work on that quality in myself. And came to, a place where I was basically trying to cultivate more humility, I guess. That would be, in a sense, kind of like the opposite of vanity.
Yeah.
And then he said that I realized after a while that I was starting to achieve some success in cultivating humility. And now I'm afraid that I might be not humble about the fact that I am humble.
Exactly. That's again a thing which you find in Inayat Khan repeatedly. Even one's humility can become one's vanity. So he said, well, it's always there. It's because it is that sense of I which is simply inborn in the human being and which ultimately is maybe a divine quality. But if that is so, make it a divine quality and abandon those outward kind of vanities which are really nothing more than just feathers in the air. But there is something which you have to recognize. You can never say that you have really conquered it all. You're bound as a human being to your physical and mental being. But just be aware of it and try to have that quality deepened and refined and further developed towards a sense of divine fulfillment. So that's the kind of thing he says about it. Well, then, of course, another thing, and there again you see how strongly this is focused on the development of the human personality, the breeding of the single human being. And that's why I think it's worthwhile nowadays, where all these things generally tend to be very lax in many different societies, especially here in the West, of course. Then he says, one other aspect which you need is self-respect, is dignity, but at a proper time. Again, it is something which you have to maintain. You have a certain dignity. You certainly need a certain self-respect, but again, in a proper time. Don't use that against others. Use it to harmonize with others. Use it to to be one with others. Don't use it to set yourself off as from others. So to him, again, that was a very important aspect of life. And then he says, what is nobleness of character? What is nobleness of character? It's the wide outlook. The wider the outlook of the being, that is the nobleness of the human character. Wideness and depth of the outlook. And it will be no surprise coming in this whole series of ideas of how the human personality will be developed. Another thing he says, manners and qualities. Those manners which a person has, the qualities which he displays, which are an outcome of consideration, an outcome of that sense, how do you deal with others in a proper way, which he considers extremely important in the development of the human personality. And then of thoughtfulness and consideration, and a certain economy in expression. To have a measured mode of expression, he says, is also a form of modesty, and at the same time a way in which whatever you express becomes all the more effective.
Shaikh-al-Mashaik, let's talk about that, because I was reading some of these qualities in this book, and you talked about economy, and I found that really fascinating.
Yes.
So I'm going to quote a couple of things from this book and ask you to share more. And so he says here, economy is about to try and save another person, spare another person from using energy in the way of thought, speech, and action. Sometimes this consideration comes to one, actually, in some way, that comes to one from the moment one begins to realize the value of life. So it's about realizing the value of life.
Yes.
And as one begins to consider this subject, one spares oneself from unnecessary thought, speech, or action, and economically uses one's own thought, speech, and action. And by valuing one's own life and action, one learns to value the same for others.
Yes.
Economizing with one's money is of much less importance. This is fascinating to me. It's of much less importance compared to economizing with one's life and energy and that of others.
That's right. Yes, exactly. Yes.
It's a stunningly beautiful thought, because in our material world, we tend to measure everything in terms of money and material possessions.
Yes.
But here we are saying that there is a whole other metric, which is the finite amount of energy that you have, for your time on this planet. And what are you doing to maximize, the potential of every moment and use it in the wisest possible way?
Exactly. Yes. That's his point. Indeed.
Yes. It's beautiful. It reminds me also of a quote from Henry David Thoreau, one of these, transcendentalists here in the United States, who borrowed so much from some of these Eastern traditions. So he said, the price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it.
That's wonderfully said. That's wonderfully expressed indeed. Yes, that's the same idea. Very, very well said. Yes, indeed.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, so beautiful. So wonderful. So you were taking us through some of these other attributes of personality.
Yes. So these are, as you say, that they are very much focused on the development of the human personality. As one starts to take action in life. But it is always, then it's something what we would call the objectivity. But Inayat Khan here calls it, in this particular context, he calls it an awakened sense of justice. Because that's part of the human personality, to have an awakened sense of justice and the possibility to qualify things. And he says that is a way of making the soul alive. Justice means unselfishness, taking away your judgment, because you're always either to be kind of prejudiced about something which you don't agree with, to be prejudiced about an opinion which you don't like, etc., etc. So try to gain a sense of justice through unselfishness. And practice it upon yourself. Practice it upon yourself, that justice, that fairness, and as I say, to reach precisely what we in modern terms call objectivity. Be objective in your dealings with yourself in the very first place. And then, of course,
when you say objective in dealing with yourself, do you mean being honest with yourself about your own, faults, not just your, your strengths? Would that be an example?
Exactly. Is that ability to be objective about yourself, to be to have a certain practice, the justice, to have a certain fairness, etc., and really to kind of, yes, for the sense of justice, you have to take back yourself a bit. People are unable to take themselves, but they're constantly in a subjective opinion about themselves, mostly very emotional as well. And so that whole idea of being objective is not there. So that's for him a very, very important thing to be.
It's very interesting you say that, because you share this quality of justice in a broader sense, because typically we think of justice today in the modern world in terms of certain social values that we stand for, that we believe in, that you should not steal somebody else's property, you should treat everybody equally regardless of race and gender. We think of that as justice. But you're saying there's another kind of just like subtler form of everyday personal intimate kind of relationship that you have with justice, which is that, are you being just, are you being objective, are you being balanced, are you eliminating the the fogginess in your vision to see things in a clear mental light? Wow, that's a really powerful rethinking, of what justice really is.
And he really goes so far that he says this is what makes the art of personality into a reality, because it's the secret of the soul's unfolding. So that's really going very far. So the secret of the soul's unfolding is, in fact, to have that sense of, well, what he calls that sense of justice, that sense of objectivity.
That's really powerful, really beautiful.
And of course, sooner or later, inevitably, when Inayat Khan discusses something, you will come to music. So what does he say as another block in this series? He says, the art of personality is like the art of music. It is all ear training and voice culture. And he says, to become refined is to become musical. The inward art of refinement, the outward refinement is meaningless if it not prompted by an inner impulse towards beauty. So that outward, etiquette, these forms of this is just to show, they have no value, of course. But if it is an inner impulse towards beauty, then what is expressed in the form of beauty, of musical sense, that is a certain refinement which any human being has to cultivate himself in relation to everybody else.
Yes, I find this really a wonderful metaphor. The idea that you're saying music and the sense of ear training you need for music.
Yes.
One can look at that as your relationship with life, I guess, and with your interactions with people, that, can you tune in to the particular chord that is being struck or the note that is being struck, and what is the feeling that they're going through, what is the thought they're going through, and how do you then need to respond? Is that, that's what I was gauging from that.
Yes, exactly. Ear training and voice culture. How do you perceive the other person? How do you express towards the other person?
Yes. It is so beautiful. It's so beautiful. One of the things I've seen, for example, is that some of us, we get too caught up in the idea of just trying to understand what is right. And then as long as we feel we are in the right, we just need to express it and say it. And it's a great step in the maturation of our own personality to actually recognize that our responsibility ends not just merely in knowing and saying what is right, but in knowing how to say it, when to say it, to whom to say it, how much to say it.
Exactly so. He says, never throw truth on a person's head like a stone.
Yeah.
People who want to, they think they're right, they throw something at you as if they throw a stone at you. Well, that's not the way of being right. That always is that kind of delicacy of the having a sense of how that other person is attuned and attune into that person's mode of understanding and of acting. So for him, that's again a very important thing. And then finally, among these 11 blocks, which we mentioned in your program also, that then he said the very principal thing in the art of personality is a friendly attitude. And that again is a thing you find again and again in so many of his lectures, your attitude towards others. What is your spiritual development? Development of your mind, of your heart, of your soul. What does all that mean, that development, if it is also to have that relationship to your fellow man? To remind, if you discover in your mystical experience something of the divine spark in the depth of your inner being, in the depth of your soul, then recognize that every human being has that divine impulse which gave him life. The divine impulse which is the origin of all human life, all existing, all manifestation, is that something of a kind of impulse which you cannot really analyze, which we see is there. There is that impulse of life, and that impulse of life in everything in manifestation is in particular, of course, present in every human being, and every human being, we call it that divine spark in the inner being of man. Realize that, and therefore, towards every person you meet, have a friendly attitude and feel about people with a friendly attitude as much as you possibly can, because there is the kind of spontaneity. There's that tendency to give to the other one's understanding, one's fellow feeling. That, he says, is the fulfillment of this development of the human being. And then, of course, there he brings up these ideas of dharma and adharma, consciousness of one's obligations towards others. Your dharma is your to others. If it is not there, then then it is adharma. Then it is not. It has not that sense of duty which you have towards your fellow man. Duty, but in a very sacred sense. Of course, dharma means, of course, it is in a very spiritual, religious sense. It is that or sacred obligation.
Shaikh-al-Mashaik, if you don't mind, let's go back to attitude, and I'm recognizing that we are a little bit over time. Are you okay with taking another 5 minutes to wrap up? I know we're over time. Does that work for you? Okay, I'm grateful. I'm grateful. Thank you. So on attitude, you highlighted something I think is so incredibly powerful. This idea that everyone has a divine spark, and that everyone means that even those people that you feel like they don't get it, they are far removed from you in terms of their values, et cetera, et cetera. We're living at a time in society where painfully so there are so many divisions. Yes. And this notion that can we approach every conversation, every individual, every interaction from that place of deep faith that there is a divine spark within this person, and part of my goal is to find a way to draw it out. I just find that really, really rewarding and inspiring. There's something I was reading again in the book by Hazrat Inayat Khan on personality, as you're saying on attitude, where he says the best opportunity that life offers is to get all the good from every person.
Yes, exactly.
And that opportunity is lost when you start seeing the bad side and overlooking the good. But if we saw some good, we don't have to see everything good, but if we see some good in every person, we can take it and collect it. And that is the way that we appreciate, that person, we come closer to that person, but we also become richer and richer with beauty. And in the end, that beauty so collected results in a beautiful personality. I love this idea that what he's saying is that this is not just a discipline that you have in order to respect other people and to be good to other people. Actually, it comes back to you, because when you start borrowing from the goodness in everybody, you start becoming a beautiful painting. Something like that. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. I guess to establish that kind of circulation among people, even if a difficult person, just remember there must be somewhere something which you can communicate with, which you can draw out of him. And that is a kind of service to that human being as well, to the other as well.
Yeah. So there are so many incredible qualities you've shared with us today. I mean, what could be a practical first step that we can take if we aspire to really advance this art of personality? Can you guide us? As you said, he would have a very, I forget the words you use, but something like a light touch, a very kind of gentle, simple, small little something to start people, so could you give us an example of what something like that could be for us?
Yes, well, they said that the gentleness of character, that's very important to him. But at the same time, try to train yourself in the first place to look whether what beauty can you identify? What beauty can you identify in your surroundings, in your fellow man, something which you can relate to in the sense of, so that's a way to start. The sympathy with everyone, that's an ultimate fulfillment. But it already starts with looking at developing a sense of beauty in oneself. Maybe it's not always easy to start with his fellow man, but one can start with some sense of beauty somewhere. And that will expand once that sense of beauty is there. That's the very first thing really he says. And there is the art of being able to love beauty. All right, and that will expand wherever it begins, but it will extend in time when it really is expand into, well, relating to one's fellow man as well. Not only to those one loves, but even with those with whom one has maybe not a good relationship or when one has no relationship at all. But something like this will establish that kind of relationship to your fellow man in general. Seeing the good.
Yes, wonderful. I'm taking a quote from the book to build on what you just said, sir. And you know, he's saying, mistake is in the nature of the human being, but try to make it less and less.
Yes.
You know, there must be the tendency to making fewer mistakes. The
Yes.
more one alters, the more there is a tendency to alter, and the more one keeps, the more there is a tendency to keep.
Exactly.
And so it's this notion of just small steps that become big leaps over time.
Yes. And also never be too intimidated when you fail or when you fall. Failing and falling is natural for the human. Don't be too dramatic about it. Of course, get up and go on, and certainly by all means, but do not, I mean, what you sometimes find in certain very religious communities, they are overcome by sinfulness, how very sinful they are, and all that kind of thing. Well, that's a kind of egoism as well. You are not going to be relieved out of outward egotism if you say how very sinful you are. Forget, of course, acknowledge your mistakes, learn from them, but feel that from any failure or any fall, you have learned, and so with that learning, you can go on again and leave it behind you.
Yes. You know, there are very powerful lessons here in what you have shared, not just for our individual journey, but I'm also proposing that there are lessons here for our journey as a family, for a journey as a community, for a journey as a nation, and for a journey as an organization. Let's say if we are in business, this idea that we have an ideal point that we use as a North Star about the kind of values we want to assimilate and practice, the kind of people we want to be, the kind of culture we want to be. But we also have this very human acceptance that we are not there yet. And that we can take small steps towards getting there. And be honest with ourselves each time we fall, that we have fallen. And we will learn from this. And we will strive on. You know, and if this idea could be part of our national consciousness, if this could be part of our family consciousness, a parent apologizing to a child about a slip up in how they acted in a certain way, a president apologizing to a nation about a slip up in how we acted in a certain hour, a CEO apologizing to the organization that we are human. This is the ideal point. We all agree on it. I have failed in this regard, but I'm acknowledging it, and I'm going to strive to move on in a different way. I wonder what kind of a world we could create.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's very much a point indeed. And relating to that, there is one thing which he emphasizes also very much. All these values, you develop your values not only in spiritual life, but or even in business life, even in life in the world. Don't think that you just abandon that or you don't become conscious of that. He says, for instance, if you allow, I'll read two short passages of his about this. That he says, the real mystic should have just as good qualifications for business, for industry, for social and political life as the materially minded man. The mystic should be a wonderful scientist, an influential statesman, an inspired artist. And then he says, I don't like it when people tell me, you are a mystic. I thought you would not take notice of this or that kind of worldly thing. Why should I not take notice of it? I take notice of every little detail, although every little detail does not occupy my mind so much that I don't take notice of anything else. But so, and then again he goes on to say, those who evolve spiritually only become one-sided. They expand only the inner consciousness and not the outward one. They may become unbalanced. Maybe spiritually they have extraordinary powers, but if they have no balance, what is it? If that is the understanding of the world, we should be most conscientious in order not to give the world a wrong impression. And that is the point what he makes. If we have a profession, if we are in business or in industry, we should do it fully, proving to the world that we can be as practical as everybody else, and also economical, regular in every way, systematic, persevering, enthusiastic. All these qualities we must show, and at the same time evolve spiritually. But it is these qualities which will give us the proof of our spirituality. So then...
I mean, that just had my hair standing on edge, you know. It was so beautiful. It was so beautiful. And, you know, it does validate, I think, the possibilities for all of us, isn't it? Whichever, you know, station life has put us in, whatever profession or career or role we have been put in, we are being asked to be mystics, you know, in those moments, you know, and to bring the highest spirituality to those moments, and also to allow life to mold us and to, you know, further advance us.
And he has another passage that he says somewhere, he said, I've sometimes met a businessman who were all their life only in business, but through their business, through that single-minded development of what they wanted to achieve, well, they achieved in their own way something which mystics spend years on trying to achieve in their way. You see that if your whole sense of selfhood is, so to speak, merged into the object of what you want to achieve, then you become, so to speak, that object that you have wanted to achieve. Well, that's a fulfillment in itself. And
yes,
he tells of another businessman who had, at the end of his life, acquired a large estate, and Inayat Khan stayed with him, and then he went for a walk in the evening through that estate, and then Inayat Khan said to him, how far does this estate extend? Then this man said to him, would you like to know? Well, all this which you see here, but also that adjoining sea which you can see from here, and the sky, and everything which is there, that's all mine. And that man was a businessman, but he was a mystic.
Yeah. So beautiful, so beautiful.
If that is there or something, then it will achieve its goal anyway.
Yeah. As we wrap up, Shaikh-al-Mashaik, can you, if you're open to it, can you share your earthly age with us in this life?
Well, I'm supposed to be 93.
I mean, folks, can you believe that? I mean, I didn't want to highlight that until we came to the very end, because I wanted you to be as you know, blissfully fooled as I was when I first interacted with you. When I did not know your age, I couldn't believe it, you know, because there is such a, almost like a boyish and a buoyant kind of, you know, joyful, you know, spirit in you. And a spirit of such,
that, especially the boyishness. That's enough.
Yeah. And I'm sure, you know, one metric that I found personally very intriguing is, in thinking about a successful life, is what is it like when one ages? You know, what is one's spirit like? And you know, what is the consciousness with which one is operating, you know, etc. And I mean, it's incredible. You are in some ways, to me, a living museum of, you know, what a life could be if we were to approach every moment with this discipline that you have shared with us, of the pursuit of beauty, of the art of personality, and in your case, this very elevating Sufi teachings that clearly you are living just as much as you're teaching. I'm so grateful on behalf of all of us. There has been an exuberance of expressions, even in chat, from so many of us. Thank you all for contributing, participating, sharing your own spirit, sharing some references, and as I know some of you have, of other resources we can, tap into. I'm just really grateful, and particularly, a big thank you to so many in your family that have made such noble contributions towards codifying and propagating and modernizing this really priceless Sufi wisdom. And to you in particular, I also want to kind of do a little outreach and thank you to your daughters, Sophia, Olia, who have been very thoughtful partners as well in helping us craft this session. Very, very grateful, and want to wish you a really beautiful, healthy, multi-century journey in life that can allow us to keep drinking from this fountain. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your very cordial and encouraging words. And I must say what a huge joy and inspiration it is for me to see that you, who from my point of view are very much the younger generation, we are carrying on this shared Indian sense of, sharing the outer life with inner reality, carrying on these two together, ennobling life in this way to have this togetherness of one's outer achievement and one's inner enlightenment. And that you're carrying this on in your way, this way which is understandable for people of today and tomorrow. For me, that is a wonderful encouragement to see. So may you be very, very successful in every way and every direction of your further course in life.
Yeah. Since we both have a shared Indian tradition, if I was with you and if I could, take that liberty, if you would give me that, I would be, bowing down and touching your feet right now. So, yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much.
All the very best in everything.
Yeah. I really value and appreciate it. Folks, I hope that you're being left with the same stirred sentiments as I am. This has been such a, just such a rich and soul-stirring journey, isn't it? Those words from Hazrat Inayat Khan and our own Shaikh-al-Mashaik sharing his story, that really powerful example of Noor Inayat Khan and the precision of thought and the deep devotional selflessness with which he went and served in the Second World War, but just in a way that married her values with the messiness of what was happening in the world at that time. And then this art of personality and all these very subtler ways in which we can try to understand our inner condition and our outer condition and bring them into harmony, culminating in those last few words from Shaikh-al-Mashaik about how, the outer and the inner, they're not meant to be in conflict, and you can be in any profession and you can ennoble it by bringing the mystic instinct in it. Thank you so much for validating that this was an important conversation to have with your very gracious contributions in chat as well. All right. You take care. All the best. We have a guest next week as well, this time, talking about a topic which is, in a sense, like a very modern treatment of similar themes, the practice of groundedness. And this gentleman, Brad Stelberg, has been with us, some time back, talking about your passion and how it can help you, but also hurt you. He's a wonderful, modern day thinker and teacher, and it'll be, I think, a real reward for us to study, his way of thinking through these 6 principles of the practice of groundedness as a very practical discipline in life. And it'll be, in some ways, I think, very complementary to the even deeper spiritual Sufi conversation that we had today. All right. He's just launched this book, The Practice of Groundedness, and come for a rich, feast on this topic next week. So thank you all. All the best, Godspeed, and we will see you soon. Take care.